was 2 or 3 months into my decluttering journey when I realized that I'd messed it up. And I made so many more mistakes as time went on. So if you feel like your decluttering progress has stalled, it might be because of one of these. Let's go. The year was 2015. My daughter was about to turn 2. I was pulling myself out of postnatal depression and finally feeling able to tackle the chaos around me. Decluttering for me has always been less about, creating space and much more about maintaining mental health. But I have made some mistakes over the years that have stopped me from getting the kind of best results I could and have also significantly slowed down my progress. So while initially I was choosing to declutter a lot of stuff, I still didn't feel like I was making any progress, like no inroads, and it's because of this first mistake. I wasn't following through. This has two parts, and my big mistake early on was the first one. I officially started decluttering in April 2015 with the KonMari method, but then I had to take the month of August off to get the stuff out of my house. Lots of recycling and shredding and trips to the charity shop. I even tried selling some stuff. Decluttering requires a lot of energy, particularly the KonMari method. And by the time you go through all of your stuff and decide what you're getting rid of, what you're keeping, you just want to be done with it. But if you stop there, you're stopping too soon. You really need to push forward. Otherwise, all you've really done is just made piles with your stuff. And the second part then is actually finding a home for everything. You're not done just because you've decided what to get rid of and what to keep. You have to follow through and put everything where it needs to go. I took August off, I got rid of the stuff, got myself back on track, but then very soon I ran into another issue, particularly with stationery, because I had these grand plans of, creating beautiful scrapbooks and decorating physical planners and notebooks. But the truth is, I'm not like artsy and craftsy at all. I can't make something cute. I wish I were that person, but I'm not. But back then I wanted that so badly that I convinced myself that I was definitely going to use all of that stuff. You may have heard this referred to as your fantasy self, that ideal version of yourself where you are great at everything and you have infinite time and resources to actually devote to all those things. But by keeping all of that stuff, I was almost making myself feel bad for not being that person, for not being perfect. I had to accept that my fantasy self was just that. It was a fantasy. I had to learn to kind of love who I actually am and lean into that. And that ties in with this next idea, which became more and more apparent to me as we were packing up our lives to move from Ireland to the US. It's something that the KonMari method is based on, and that is focusing on joy, focusing on what you're gaining instead of what you're losing. I knew that our move was going to be this brand new adventure for us, and that's not to say that you have to move to get that feeling, but it just brought about a different perspective. The possibility of a fresh start made me see things in a different way. It's easier, I think, to let go of an old life when you are actively creating a new one. Plus, I didn't want to just pack a whole pile of junk. Building excitement around a new way of living is a great way to make it easier to say no to things that don't bring you that feeling. However, moving to the US did throw up another obstacle. Now, this wasn't kind of created by the US. I had this problem long before, but it did highlight it a little. Shopping. I was buying things at a rate that was equal to, if not greater than, the amount that I was kind of unburdening myself. And that's pointless. I had to remind myself why I was decluttering. Plus, what I started doing was tracking everything that I was purchasing for a while, and then I looked back to see which of those purchases actually kind of meant something to me, which purchases were worth it. Yeah, hardly any. By evaluating the purchases that I was making and just generally trying to avoid the shops as much as possible, I was able to break that decluttering, re-cluttering cycle. The next ones I've only just realized recently were holding me back, and they're kind of similar, so I'll lump them together, but they're both revolving around this idea of doing something where you're not going to see a big or immediate impact. So part one of that for me involved decluttering spaces that were out of sight. So, you know, maybe the inside of a cupboard or drawer, or a room or a closet space, or an area that I don't spend a lot of time in. And obviously there's absolutely nothing wrong with decluttering those spaces, but if the more visible spaces are still cluttered, you're not going to have the same effect. It's just not going to make that big an impact on you to declutter a drawer when, you know, a very visible space is still really messy and cluttered. So now, for example, instead of decluttering the contents of my filing cabinet, I will tackle the top of my desk or something like that. Which leads me to part 2 of this, which is something that I have definitely noticed here in my home office, and that is this urge that I have to kind of perfect a space, or to keep decluttering the same space to try and get it perfect. You know, making tiny little tweaks and changes when really my time would be best spent focusing on a more cluttered area, an area that deserved my attention a little bit more. If I have 20 minutes, for example, I'm much better off spending that time tackling a space that is very cluttered rather than making minimal changes that really aren't going to have that big of an impact. And now we're up to present day Laura. Something that I'm currently working on is trying to make decluttering part of my regular routine. So as a perfectionist, I sometimes feel like I should tackle an entire space, you know, start to finish. I should be completing a space. Now though, I'm learning the value of just decluttering 1 or 2 things here and there on a regular basis. So rather than waiting for an entire afternoon to dedicate to it, I will also be decluttering in the meantime. Those bigger decluttering sprees are kind of few and far between, whereas if I get rid of a little bit here and there, it all adds up to a lot of boxes of stuff leaving my home every month. Now, if you want to jumpstart your decluttering journey, I do have a 5-day challenge coming up. I will link details in the description for you. But obviously another thing you want to avoid is getting rid of something that you're just going to regret. Watch this video for things that you should never declutter. And until then, go raibh míle maith agaibh. Agus feiceann mé sibh go luath. Slán!